Hello, my name is McKenna Rawlins, and I will be presenting on women in Japan. In the beginning, there was Izanami. If we recall the creation myth of Japan, Izanagi and Izanami were the creators of the islands. All was going well until Izanami gave birth to Ibisu, who was very weak and boneless. The couple was soon told that it was Izanami's fault because she spoke first during their wedding. I thought this would be worth bringing up because, in a way, she is the first woman in Japan and she is already subjected to male dominant culture. Let's fast forward to the Heian period, where there are more recordings about women's lives. During the Heian period, women could divorce and remarry if their husband was violent towards them, and women could own property independently from their husband or father if she was born into a high-ranking family. Around this time, women were expected to be well educated and cultured, especially with art, music, poetry, fashion, and calligraphy. Mothers were responsible for educating their children, therefore, women played a large influence on their children. If women did not marry, they could become concubines or mistresses to a man. Because women were well educated around this time, we see more journals and diaries from women during this period, but we also have the very first novel ever written. Lady Murasaki Shikibu wrote The Tale of Genji. This extensive novel expands on the mistreatment of women during the Heian period. Then came the Kamakura period, and life for women in Japan sadly did not improve. During the Kamakura period, the Ie system gave both social and political priority to men, and the Ie system involved an extended membership family system, including not only family members but also servants, household workers, and so on. In this system, the chief male had great power, and the other members had to obey his decisions. The position of the women was low in the Ie system, since it was believed that they were inferior to men. Even if they married well, women were in weak position because they could be sent away for any reason. They had to adjust themselves to the customs of their husbands' Ie and work hard to satisfy their husbands' parents. Most important, they had the duty of bearing children, and if wives could not fulfill these obligations, they were often forced to divorce. Women were expected not only to obey their husbands but also to be strong as wives of warriors in supporting their husbands and running the family during wars. Some women became warriors. Tomoe Goten is a famously fierce female samurai who inspired the epic The Tale of Yake. She fought at the Genpei War for the Minamoto clan, and she is said to have beheaded the leader of the Musashi clan, and to have led only 300 samurai soldiers against the 2,000 Taira warriors. Her death is a mystery. Some say she became the wife of a samurai, others say she became a Buddhist nun and lived into her 90s. Either way, she was a warrior worth 1,000, ready to confront a demon or a god. Another famous woman for the period is Lady Nijo, who was a court lady that wrote an unfinished journalistic narrative describing her experiences with Emperor Go-Daigo. She was shipped off by her father at 14 to become the emperor's mistress. Her life in the Kyoto court made her quite accustomed to finer things, so she did not hold back in insulting other areas of Japan outside of her court for being dirty and unimpressive. She developed basically Stockholm Syndrome for the emperor, which accurately describes the experiences of many other mistresses who were mistreated by the men, yet remained loyal. The Tokugawa or Edo period had everlasting damage on the lives of women in Japan. Partly due to the influence of Confucianism during this time, women became subordinate to men in every way. They lost all economic and political rights. They could not own land or property, and a woman's husband was entitled to kill his wife for being lazy or bad. There weren't many female idols during the Edo period, unlike the previous ones, and there weren't any famous female writers either. Very few women were educated, only some daughters of samurai. Women were also only allowed to write in hiragana, which is the simple writing system as opposed to the kanji. They were expected to stay home and inside and to be a good wife. The Meiji Restoration improved women's lives compared to the suppressing Edo period. Even though women still did not have legal rights, they were, however, able to divorce their husband and had the right to own land and property with the consent of the husband. The phrase "good wife, wise mother" (Ryosaiki Kenbo) was introduced during the Meiji Restoration because women were now responsible for educating their children. The educational system of the Meiji era emphasized schooling for girls as well as boys because it was considered that they would all become mothers in the future and thus have a formative influence on their children's education. The marrying age was still young at around 16, but a lot of women went into the workforce. During the Meiji period, women made up 80% of the workforce in the textile industry, but women worked under poor conditions and were exploited in the factories and hardly paid. Yosano Akiko was a pen name of a controversial feminist poet during the Meiji era. Akiko frequently wrote for the all-woman literary magazine Seto, or Bluestocking, as well as other publications. Her opinions were rooted in the concept of equality, partaking in child-rearing, financial independence, and social responsibility. She's considered a feminist pioneer in Japan. After World War II, women finally gained the right to vote and equality before the law. The new constitution provided men and women with equal rights, which helped improve women's position in society. In spite of laws advocating equality, however, sexual discrimination in jobs still resulted in important social problems. This occurs partly as a result of Confucian way of thinking in which men are believed to be superior to women, and such aspects of society are reflected in Japanese language expressions and human relationships. Recently, many women have obtained higher level of education and are playing an active role in society, resulting in a number of social phenomena: a higher average age for first marriages, a decrease in the birth rate, and an increase in the number of single people. The 1985 amendment, Equal Opportunity in Employment for Men and Women, was aimed at improving discrimination. Women were seen as second-class workers, and their salaries were much lower than the men's. Younger women were office ladies who performed secretarial jobs. Older women had less glamorous jobs, such as meal preparers or child caretakers. Beate Sirota Gordon is not well known, but she is the author of the women's rights clauses in the new constitution. After the war, women became in charge of household spending. During the 50s and 60s, women would work those office lady jobs and then marry and retire. The husbands directly gave their wives their finances, which kept them from gambling it or spending it elsewhere. The wives would make sure the family was well taken care of, and then she might spend extra money on herself, indulging in hobbies. The 1970s and 80s brought an even bigger change as more women were accepted into higher jobs. Chiake Mukai is the first Japanese female astronaut who worked for NASA. More women focused on their careers, and some never married at all. The Abe administration is looking to increase the ratio of women in the labor force as well as in boardrooms, so they created Womenomics. This scheme failed, as it promised incentives such as better childcare, but did not follow through. In 2020, the Global Economic Forum ranked Japan 121st out of 153 countries on gender equality. Our textbook, A Brief History of Japan, argues that many in Japan still secretly favor the notion that women are not meant to lead offices, but to beautify the office for a while before marrying and having children. Patriarchy is deeply ingrained in Japanese society and still affects the livelihood of women. Throughout the eras, women's rights fluctuated, but nothing was more liberating for women than the new constitution, thanks to the help of Beate Sirota Gordon. Women's fashion in Japan also has changed quite a bit throughout the century. The word wafuku is taken to mean original Japanese clothing, such as the kimono. Just like the patriarchy, the kimono is still a huge part of Japanese culture, but it is not worn as often. Before the Meiji Restoration, the geisha style was very popular. It was adopted from the Tang Dynasty, but the Japanese introduced the black teeth and shaved eyebrows look. Since the Meiji Restoration, most women wear yokufu, Western clothing. Here, the Victorian style was popular. The newer fashion is less conservative than before, reflecting the increase in women's liberties. Kawaii! Although not everyone dresses like this in Japan, kawaii or cute fashion is common among younger women and is also popular in other cultures all over. Thank you for watching the history of women's lives in Japan.